All right, we're live from the Bnai Abraham Synagogue, Virginia, Minnesota. Okay, so you have the booklet? Good. All right, so we're just going to go through just the explanation of what the Afikoman is about that we have on Passover, right? So, and we'll go through, the booklet has some different texts, we'll go through the text and we'll come to some conclusions. So, all right, so first of all, I have to, okay. So the Afikoman is, first of all, is we have on Passover, we have we have three matzahs, right? We take the middle matzah, we break it in half, right? And we take the matzah and we're looking, which one is the bigger piece, right? And we take the bigger piece and we put it away for the end of the Seder. So the reason why we put away the bigger piece is because the matzah is called poor man's bread, right? And poor people, they don't know what's going to be tomorrow, right? Somebody who's really destitute. So they take the small amount and they save the bigger amount for tomorrow, right? So that's one of the reasons why we take the bigger piece and we put it away. In the Afikoman, many people, there's different customs about the Afikoman. Some people like to steal the Afikoman. It's a very popular custom. If you'll see on page 192 in the booklet, probably the first page, you'll see there's a sources for this. I'm not going to get too into it, but there's different explanations for this custom of stealing the Afikoman. So the first one is in the Talmud, it says that we grab the matzahs on the night of Passover so the children shouldn't fall asleep. So, in other words, the idea is that we shouldn't delay the Seder, right? So it says chotfin etz matzahs. We grab the matzah. Like, let's just get to the matzah. We don't want to dilly-dally on the Seder because the children are the focus of the Seder. So this word chotfin, or grabbing, became one of the liturgical, sources for stealing the Afikoman. So that's one source. And we see in text, the second, text 1b, you'll see, again, it's brought down in this idea. And many rabbis came out against this custom because it's a way that you're kind of green-lighting theft, right? That people steal the Afikoman. So many people many people have this custom, many people don't have the custom to steal the Afikoman. But okay, so but the bottom line is really what the Afikoman is about is that on Passover, the real highlight of Passover is the Paschal lamb, right? The sacrifice of Passover, which the Jewish people did the original Passover, right? And they took the blood and they put it on the doorpost, right? And then God passed over those homes and came to the homes of the Egyptians, right? So nowadays we don't have the Passover lamb because we're not in Jerusalem. We don't have the temple. So instead, we take a piece of matzah and we say, this represents the Passover lamb, right? And then we eat that piece of matzah at the end of the Seder. Now, why do we eat it at the end of the Seder? Because the Talmud says that we're supposed to be full, be satiated, be completely already eaten, and then eat the Passover lamb. So you'll see on page 194, text 3a. So it says in the Talmud, the holiday sacrifice, which accompanied the Passover sacrifice, is eaten first, so that the Passover sacrifice is eaten on a full stomach. Okay? And even inside in the Talmud again, you see text 3b, it says, we do not add any dessert after the Passover sacrifice, right? And this is actually in the Haggadah, this is the answer to the question of the wise son, right? When he asks us, what do we do on Passover? This is the law that we tell him. We don't eat anything after the Afikoman, right? After the Passover lamb. So So in the times of the temple, they would actually have two sacrifices. They would have the holiday sacrifice that was brought on every holiday, and then they would have the Passover lamb. They would eat the holiday sacrifice first, and eat the matzah and all that, and then they would eat the Passover lamb. So they didn't really need to eat it. They weren't hungry, right? Now the Rashbam, who was a grandson of Rashi, he says that the holiday sacrifice is to enjoy the holiday, right? The festivity of the holiday. So you got to enjoy it. You got to be hungry. The Passover sacrifice, however, is about freedom, right? We talk about what we're kind of like kings, right? We lean like the kings did in ancient times, right? All those kind of things that we do specifically in freedom sense, in that we're like kings. And kings eat even when they're not hungry, right? That's one of the luxuries of being a king, right? You can do whatever you want. So that's one of the reasons why we specifically eat it when it's full. And you'll see this in text 3c on page 195, right? It's forbidden to eat anything after the Passover sacrifice so as not to remove its taste from the mouth, because it ought to be eaten at the end of the meal when one is sated. The same is true of all sacrifices, as the verse states, for a distinction, i.e. the greatness, the way kings eat. Okay, so the rabbi said that you don't eat anything after the Passover sacrifice. Now, and Maimonides also brings this down in text 4, that it's a rabbinic ordinance that nothing at all is eaten after the matzah, not even roasted seeds, nuts, or the like. Rather, even though one ate matzah and afterward ate other foods, fruit, and the like, one returns and eats a second olive size of matzah at the end of the meal and ceases eating. Right? So the last thing that we eat is the Afikoman, and the only thing we're going to eat afterwards is we're going to drink. Actually, is the 2 cups of wine, right? But the last thing that we eat on Passover is the Afikoman. Okay. So, but the real question is, why don't we eat them? Why do we eat the matzah specifically when we're full? Right? What's this idea? What is this about? Wouldn't it make more sense to eat the matzah when we're still hungry, when we have the energy, right? By the time we get to the Afikoman, people are like, right? Because not only do we eat the matzah, we eat the maror, then we eat the matzah with the maror, right? Then we have brisket dinner or whatever, whatever you prepared, eat a whole meal. And then finally, after you eat your regular dessert, you eat your ice cream or whatever you're going to have, then we finally get to the Afikoman. Right? It sounds counterintuitive. Really, we should maybe save some energy. Like, if this is so important, it's representing the Passover lamb, let's eat it as the main deal. Right? Why are we waiting to the end? Okay. So we're going to compare now Passover to Shabbos, because on Shabbos we have something very different. You'll see text number 5 on page 196. This is from the Talmud. It's actually a Tosefta, which is some of the teachings of the rabbis of the era of the Mishnah that didn't make it in, right? They didn't make it into the canonized Mishnah. These are other teachings. So it says as follows. It's brought in the Talmud that a person should not eat on Friday afternoon. One should not eat anything after the time of Mincha, which would be a little after midday, so as to enter the Shabbos with an appetite. This is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yossi says one may continue to eat after nightfall. Okay? So there's a debate amongst the rabbis. Are you allowed to eat on Friday afternoon or not? But we see here there's an idea that you shouldn't be eating in order to come to Shabbos hungry, to be hungry for the food of Shabbos, right? And the law is that we don't really follow either opinion, but we kind of take it's kind of a suggestion, very highly suggested, that basically you shouldn't have a full meal after midday, a little bit after midday, so as not to be not hungry for Shabbos. Okay, so now contrast that to the Passover lamb, right? We're saying the Passover lamb, or in our case, the piece of matzah that's going to be the Afikoman, we're saying you got to be not hungry, got to be full. In Shabbos, we're saying you should be hungry for Shabbos food. So which one is it? What are we trying to? What's different about Shabbos versus Passover? Okay. So we'll go to text 6a. You with me? on page 197. All right. So this is from the Talmud, and he says as follows. Rabbi Bar, that was the name of this rabbi, said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, what is the meaning of the verse, for the paths of God are right, and the just walk in them, but the transgressors stumble over them? Right? The verse sounds like that the same thing could be tripping one person, and some people walk right with the correct way. So he says as follows. This is analogous to a case of two people who each roasted their Passover sacrifice. One ate it for the sake of the mitzvah, while the other ate it for pleasure. One of the one who ate it for the sake of the mitzvah, the verse states, and the just walk in them. The one who ate it for the sake of pleasure, the verse states, but the transgressors stumble over them. Right? So we have the same thing, right? That one person ate the Passover sacrifice because it's a mitzvah to eat it, and the other person ate it because he enjoyed it. It's good roasted lamb. It's better, right? Okay. So there's a story that there's a funny story that there was once a person who invited someone to his home to eat dinner, right? And the person is very hungry, he's traveling, and he says to his guest, where are you from? He says, I'm from Moscow. He says, you're from Moscow? He says, yeah. He says, do you know so-and-so from Moscow? And he says, I'm sorry, he's dead. And he continues to eat his food. And the guy's shocked, So then he says, how about so-and-so? Do you know him? Oh, he also is dead. And he keeps going throughout the meal, and every time the guy asks a question, he just says he's dead, and he continues to eat his meal. And at the end, he says, you should know, when I eat, the whole Moscow's dead. In other words, he was focused on what he was doing. He was focused on eating, right? Obviously, it's a joke, but there is an element of, there's an element of truth to every joke, right? That a person could be, what is a person's focus when they're eating? Right? Are they focused on other things? Are they focused on what they're doing? What is their intention? So both of these things, the Shabbos meal and the Passover lamb, are both the same action of eating. But the intentions are going to be very different, and we're going to explain it now in text 7. This is from a talk that the Rabbi gave in 1951 after the Seder. He says as follows. The Passover sacrifice must be eaten on a full stomach, right? Unlike the Shabbos meal, which we eat when hungry to satisfy the appetite. So one of the reasons for this is to demonstrate that the Passover sacrifice is being eaten for the sake of the mitzvah, not for the sake of one's bodily pleasure. So much so that the body's interest is completely ignored. Even if the body is full and doesn't want to eat more, one nevertheless eats the Passover sacrifice with the same gusto as if he were hungry. Furthermore, even though one is not hungry eating the sacrifice, nevertheless it's eaten with tremendous joy. So, in other words, that we're specifically ignoring the body in the case of Passover, right? We're saying we don't need the body. The body already ate, right? On Shabbos, we're eating in order to satiate the body, right? We're inviting the body, so to speak, to the Shabbos meal. We're saying Shabbos is holy. It's a mitzvah to eat on Shabbos, and the body should also eat. But on Passover, we're saying, even though we're kind of ignoring the body, we're saying the body ate and everything, nonetheless, we're going to eat again, right? So it's specific. We're trying to ignore the body. We're trying to ignore the natural appetite that person has. Now, because obviously there are some mitzvahs that are very difficult, right? There's mitzvahs to give charity. It's not an easy thing, right? To give your money to somebody else. But it could even be an enjoyable thing, right? If you see the reward of giving. There are mitzvahs that don't require you to take time out of your day. Not every mitzvahs are always enjoyable. But some mitzvahs are enjoyable. So now, what Afikoman is kind of the extreme of that. We're saying it's not about the enjoyment. Even though eating generally is an enjoyable thing, but in this case, we're saying it's not about that. It's not about the enjoyment. Versus the Shabbos, it is about that, right? It is about the enjoyment. So essentially, what we're really saying here is that whenever we do a mitzvah, right, we talk about this a lot, where there's a dichotomy between the body and the soul, right, between the physical and the spiritual, right? And the question of Jewish history has always been, what do we focus on, right? What are we trying to do? Should we focus on the body? In other words, bring the body along, or should we ignore the body? So, for example, if it's about ignoring the body, then we could become a hermit, right? We could not eat anything, but just enough to keep body and soul together, and sit in an ivory tower and study Torah, right? Or if it's about the physical, if it's about the body, then we engage in the world, right? We eat kosher food, we eat delicious food, we engage in business, right? We engage with others. So in Hasidic thought, it's really we teach that it's about bringing the body along, right? Refining the body, and the body itself can become the venue or the physical, in a general sense, can become the venue to bring godliness into this world, right? So if it's about bringing godliness into heaven, down to earth, essentially, instead of bringing earth to heaven, right? Then we need to engage in the physical. Okay, so if we see text 8 on page 199, we could do this a little. We'll explain this a little more. It says as follows. Let's explain the notion. This is a continuation of the previous text. Let's explain the notion of ignoring the body when eating the Passover sacrifice in terms of personal religious experience. It is true that divine service is mainly about perfecting the body, yet everyone knows full well that their personal body and animal soul may not be spiritually up to par. Regardless, one ought to serve God with fervor and joy, thus ignoring the spiritual imperfection of the body. As the Alter Rebbe writes in the Tanya, true, the body may be abominable and loathsome, yet let his divine soul be more precious to him than his loathsome body, and rejoice in the observance of the Torah and mitzvahs, without letting the sadness on account of the lowly state of the body interfere with or disturb the joy of the soul. As explained elsewhere, it is possible for a person to have weeping lodged on one side of the heart and joy lodged on the other. In other words, instead of being sad on account of the body, it is better to rejoice on account of the soul, and the fact that the soul you have placed in me is pure. Right? So a person has an option. What are you going to focus on? Right? Are you going to be depressed because you have a body that has desires that are loathsome and abominable? Or you're going to be excited that you have a soul? Right? So every time you do a mitzvah, right, essentially you could focus on the soul, right? You say, it's time to celebrate the soul. It's a time to ignore the part of the body. But, and this is exactly what we're doing on Passover. We're saying, forget about the body. Let's focus on the fact we have a soul, right? The body ate already. He's gone. He's done. Put him to sleep. Right? This is kind of like, as a side thing, right? This is kind of like a Hasidic Farbrengen, right? A Hasidic gathering. What do people do? They get together, they eat a little bit, they drink a little l'chaim, right? They kind of like put the soul, had its fun, and now we could say words of Torah. Now we could talk about real life, right? We could talk about our service of God. We could talk about the problems that we have with each other, right? Within ourselves, I should say, right? Because we're kind of like, okay, the body has what it needs. We put it to the side, and now we can focus on the soul. And this is what Passover teaches us. So if we would eat the sacrifice on an empty stomach, we would have an unwanted guest, right, at our soul party, right? The body would be there too. However, as long as the body has an appetite, you would have to negotiate with it, right? You would have to say, okay, how much is really the soul, right? Maybe it's too much on the body. Right? Maybe I'm just enjoying it. Maybe I'm not doing it for the mitzvah. So in Passover, we focus on the soul. Now the question is, what about Shabbos? We said Shabbos sounds much more about taking the body along with us. Right? On Shabbos, we want to be hungry. We want to bring the body along. But the truth is that if we don't eat on Friday afternoon, right, then we have this appetite, is that the only way we could do that and bring the body along is if we have our priorities straight about what it's about. So kind of on Passover, we were refocusing on the soul. Because throughout the year, on Shabbos and other times, right, we can bring the body along. But the only way to do that is but then, like we said, we have to negotiate with the body. How much is really for the body? There's a story about one time the Baal Shem Tov saw somebody eating cholent, eating a good piece of meat on Shabbos. And the person was eating with such gusto, right? And with his Shabbos clothing and everything. And the Baal Shem Tov told his students to put their arms around each other. And kind of he lifted them to the spiritual plane. And they saw the person on a spiritual level. Instead of seeing a person eating Shabbos food, they saw an ox with a strangle. So in other words, the person, you are what you eat. And he was so invested in the food that he became an ox. He became the meat, right? Because he forgot about what it was really about. Okay, so technically it was for a Shabbos meal, so he still had the strangle, his Shabbos clothing. But he became the ox. It wasn't about the spirituality. He became what he's eating, right? So that's the problem. That could be the problem with bringing the body along, right? So on Passover is a time when we refocus, right? We kind of take a step back and we re-engage with just the soul. We kind of we set our priorities straight for the whole year. We're saying, this is what it's really about. Yes, we're going to bring the rest of the year, we're going to bring the body along. We're going to bring the physicality along. But how do we do that? It's by setting, this is what it's about. And let's see that in text. Let's see. Let's go to text 10a. So in 10a, we see here that, okay, I'll read it. Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rabbi Yossi, anybody who delights in the Shabbos is granted a boundless portion. As the verse states, if you restrain your foot because of the Shabbos, then you shall delight with God. And I will cause you to ride on high places of the land, and I will give you to eat the heritage of Jacob your father. Right? So we see that the reward for delighting in Shabbos is not like the reward of Abraham, of whom the verse states, rise, walk through the land and through its length, because I have given it to you. Nor it is like the reward of Isaac, whom the verse states, I will give you all the lands to you and your offspring. Rather, the reward for one who delights in Shabbos is the reward of Jacob. From the verse states, and you will spread out to the west and the east, and to the north and to the south. Okay, so let's see. What is this reward? What's the difference between Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? We'll see 10b. Rabbi Nachman bar Yitzchak said, one who delights in Shabbos is rescued from the oppression of exile. Okay, so we're rescued from exile. Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rav, whoever delights in Shabbos is granted his heart's desires. As the verse states, and you shall delight in God, and he will grant you your heart's desires. Now this delight in God, what does it refer to? The verse states, and you shall call the Shabbos a delight. Hence, one must say it is the delight of the Shabbos. So, okay, so now we're saying that you get this reward. What is the reward for? Eating food, enjoying the physical things on Shabbos. And like you see in 10c, now he says, what does one delight in on Shabbos? Rabbi Yehuda, son of Rav Shmuel ben Shelah, said in the name of Rav, with a dish of beets, large fish, and heads of garlic. Food, right? Delicious food. Rabbi Chia bar Ashi said, in the name of Rav, even something small, which is made in honor of Shabbos, is called delight. What is an example? He said, small fried fish. Right? Any kind of food that you enjoy on Shabbos can become holy. As follows. Why does a person become hungry? Right? Let's get really existential over here. Why does a person become hungry? Why are you hungry? Because you get hungry because your body needs food to survive. But in truth, on a spiritual level, somebody gets hungry because the soul, which really animates the body, needs the food. Why does the soul need the food? So, when God created the world, he put sparks of holiness into everything, into physical things. And through doing things in a holy way, even mundane things, we do it with the proper intentions, we could rescue, so to speak, the sparks of holiness, of godliness, that are within these physical things, and we could elevate them. For example, we're in a synagogue, You have Torah scrolls and Sidurim, right? You have physical things. And it becomes a holy object, right? A cow hide, right, becomes a holy object. The paper that the siddur is printed on becomes a holy object, right? And we treat it with reverence because there's that element of holiness that we kind of rescued and we made it. But that's on a very high level, a Torah scroll or a siddur or whatever. But even simple things like a bench, right? This bench could be used for good things, it could be used for bad things, right? This wood could be used for anything. But the fact that we're sitting on it and we're using it to study Torah, we've elevated the bench and the holiness within the bench, right? And the same thing is with food. So essentially what is going on is the soul needs that spark. He's looking for the spark, right? So the soul says, we need food. So the body says, I'm hungry. And now it's our choice. What are we going to do with the food? Are we going to make a blessing? Is the food going to be kosher? Are we going to use the energy that we get from the food for good things, for positive things, right? Like making a living to give charity, or we're going to use it to make a living to waste them on things, right? Or we're going to use the energy to study Torah, or we're going to use the energy to pray, etc. So that's really what's going on. And you'll see this in text 11. So eating, but that's during the week, okay? That's during the week, is that we're kind of a struggle between body and soul, right? The body wants food, and the soul wants the sparks, so the body gets hungry. However, Shabbos is different. Let's see number 11. Eating on the Shabbos is different than eating during the week. Even the body's physical state of hunger is more elevated. It is not a hunger for bodily benefit alone, but for a mitzvah, for enjoying the Sabbath. My father-in-law, the Rabbi, this is referring to the previous Rabbi, writes in a letter that bodily hunger for food is the result of the soul's hunger for the divine spark vested in that food, so that by eating the food, its divine purpose is realized. During the week, the body wants to eat because the soul wants to eat. But from the body's perspective, it just wants to eat. It's very difficult to be able to eat altruistically. But on Shabbos, the body's very desire to eat and to enjoy the food is a mitzvah. In other words, so during the week, we're saying the body has its own agenda, right? There's the soul's agenda, and there's the body's agenda, and the soul is trying to get the body on the same page. But on Shabbos, we're saying is that the mitzvah, the actual eating alone, is a mitzvah. So they're on the same page, right? So the food essentially in the whole world becomes elevated, that eating itself becomes a mitzvah, obviously with the right intention. Otherwise you end up being the ox with the string, right? So now, but how do we focus on this? So now the question is, how do we focus on this? So this is kind of what we said earlier. You'll see it in the text, okay? Text 12. So as explained in Tanya, celebrating the soul by ignoring the body is a form of exodus from Egypt. Okay? And this is what happened on Passover. As the verse states, the nation fled. Right? The Jewish people, they ran away from Egypt because the evil in the Jewish people was still there in full force. And at that stage, the goal was to extricate the godly soul from imprisonment and the impurity of Egypt. In other words, the time for reckoning with the spiritual status of the body is throughout the year. But on Passover, the season of our freedom, there's no room for worrying about the body. This is illustrated by eating the Passover sacrifice on a full stomach, ignoring the body. So in other words, like we said earlier, it's about, we're kind of focusing that on Passover, the Jewish people ran away. Why? The evil was still there. They didn't transform the evil that they had within them, right? Not till after Passover, right? It took them 49 days to get to the giving of the Torah. That was when they worked on themselves. But at that point, they had to leave, right? And like it says in the Haggadah, if we wouldn't have left them, we would still be there, us, our grandchildren, all our ancestors, till us today, we would have been stuck in Egypt, right? And future generations. So at that moment, they had to run away. And that's kind of what we're doing. In other words, they ignored the physical and they went full spiritual because there was they didn't have the opportunity to kind of deal with their problems, right? Sometimes, this is like, sometimes I think about it, it's kind of like the Anonymous program. The Anonymous program, at some point they say it's not the right time to figure out how much alcohol is good. You need to get out of here. No alcohol, right? Or no drugs, whatever the program is, right? It's about, that's really nice that you want to, maybe there's a time and place for some people where they could balance, right? Most people can, right? They could say, okay, I drink sometimes, but I'm not drinking all the time, and they could find that balance. But certain people, sometimes, for certain people, in some point in their life, they have to be, we're out of here, right? We're not going to be altruistic and say, well, really, there is a balance. Well, that's really nice. It's really nice for somebody who could handle that. Sometimes you can't. And that's where the Jewish people were in that time. And that's kind of what we reenact through the Seder. We'll see text 13. Okay. So we've established that owing to the revelation of the divine essence on Passover, it is not a time to focus on one's bodily state. This is emphasized in the verse's description of the Exodus, in which the nation fled because the evil in them was still fully present. Nevertheless, the ultimate goal is to serve God with the body, right, like we said earlier, by sublimating and refining it, taking the body along in one service of God. This will be fully complete in the era of the redemption of Mashiach, when God will eliminate the spirit of impurity from the earth. Therefore, in the future redemption, the nation will not flee. Rather, as the verse states, for you shall not go with haste, nor shall you go forth, but not in a flurry of flight shall you go. So, in the time of Mashiach, it says we're not going to flee, because we're going to be actually transforming the bad, right? So, in other words, on Shabbos, where it's kind of, that's the ultimate goal, right? To bring the body along, and that's why Mashiach is called Yom Shekulo Shabbat, right? That the whole week in the times of Mashiach will be like Shabbos. What does that mean? It doesn't mean we're going to do Shabbos and make Kiddush every day. What it means is that the world will be elevated to a state that there's no more struggle between good and bad, right? Everything will become on a good level. On Passover, though, is the time when God himself revealed himself to us, right? And God said, so at that point, it's not appropriate to start dealing with the bad, right? God himself revealed himself. God says, we're saying the Haggadah, right? That God himself took us out of Egypt. So in that case, it's not appropriate for us to start dealing with the bad things. It's to get out, right? To ignore the body. And then that gives us the ability to start to engage with the world and to engage with our bodies. Now, I'll just add one thing that's unique to this year specifically, is that, so outside of Israel, we have 2 days of Passover, right? The first 2 days of Yom Tov, I should say, 8 days of Passover instead of 7. And we also have, 2 Seders, right? We do the Seder twice. So in the case of the first Seder is Friday night, and the second Seder is going to be Saturday night. So the Saturday night Seder is unique, because in the times of the temple, if the Seder would be Saturday night, there actually would be only one sacrifice. There would only be the sacrifice of the Passover, because that's unique to that day. So if you're allowed, it overrides Shabbat, right? And you're able to bring the sacrifice of the Passover. However, and then you would have the Seder that evening, right? However, you would not bring the festival sacrifice that we talked about, right? This whole, what that we spoke about is based on the fact that they would, in the times of the temple, they would eat first the festival sacrifice, the holiday sacrifice, and then they would eat the Passover sacrifice, right? In the time of, if, however, Shabbat, it was Shabbat, and then you would do the Seder Saturday night, then they would only bring the Passover sacrifice, and then the next day they would bring the holiday sacrifice, right, or after Shabbat. So in that case, then they would eat the Passover lamb on an empty stomach, right? So that's, in this case, would be our second Seder, right? There's that element. So in other words, you're having Shabbat, what we talked about when the whole world is elevated, and you have Passover. So in that case, it's unique, because now you're saying we've actually elevated it to a point that even the Passover lamb itself becomes elevated to the point that we could eat it on an empty stomach. That we, because it's Shabbat, we could even bring the body along to Passover. So this year we have that outside of Israel. We have that element because we have the Passover. The second Seder is going to be on Saturday night. Make sense? Yeah. Okay. So there you go. So now you know, why do we eat the Afikoman at the end of the Seder, right? Because it's not about being hungry. It's about ignoring the body, focusing on the soul, right? And like we said, the matzah, which will make sure everybody gets some matzah, right? Some handmade shmur matzah is about feeding. It's not about feeding your body. It's about feeding the soul, right? We feed our faith. And actually the matzah itself, the physical matzah that we eat, gives energy to our faith. Not to our body, but to our soul. There you go. All right. Thank you, everybody watching on Facebook.